With the release of the highly anticipated Metroid Dread now behind us, the anticipation of the fanbase now moves on to the first-person format as the development of Metroid Prime 4 continues. If you haven't yet, I definitely recommend going through the first 3 Metroid Prime games, as they are some of my favorite video games of all time. In this video, I'll be going over what I would love to see in Metroid Prime 4 based on some of the best elements of the first 3 games, and also based on what those first 3 games missed. First off, Kraid. It was a beautiful sight to see my favorite big guy make it back to the scene in Metroid Dread. To my disappointment, he never made an appearance in any of the 3 Metroid Prime games, which was a surprise considering how he had a really significant start to the series, as he and Ridley were initially equals as the only 2 bosses Samus faced before the final confrontation with Mother Brain. With Ridley as a constant threat throughout the Metroid Prime series, it seemed due for Kraid to show up at some point. Honestly, I thought he would have showed up at Magmoor Caverns in a big magma chamber, so the fact that there wasn't even a boss at Magmoor Caverns at all seemed like a missed opportunity. There was concept art for Meta Kraid in Metroid Prime, but mostly due to time constraints, he was scrapped and replaced at the last minute by the Omega Pirate. As amazing as Kraid looks in a modern side-scroller, I can only imagine how epic this type of confrontation would feel in Prime's first-person view. Fingers crossed that he makes his overdue appearance in Prime 4. My second request seems pretty self-explanatory based on the game's title, but Prime 4 needs to include Metroid Prime / Dark Samus in some way, shape, or form. At the end of the first Prime game, you fought the final boss, Metroid Prime, in its true form, and as you're about to defeat the boss, Prime strips Samus of her face-on suit before detonating as Samus makes her escape. In the after-credits scene, you see the suit emerging from a puddle of Phazon, which we later go on to find out in Prime 2 and Prime 3 is Dark Samus. So basically, Dark Samus is Metroid Prime in a Phazon suit, and was the constant antagonist throughout the trilogy. With that in mind, having the 4th game be named Metroid Prime 4 without any connection to Dark Samus just seems out of place and lacks continuity. Yes, it did feel like there was finality with Dark Samus' demise at the end of Prime 3, but honestly, it kinda felt that way in Prime 2 and Prime 1 as well, yet they kept reintroducing her. At this point, it's almost a part of her character arc that she's the enemy that just never goes away. So as long as they do it in some way that makes sense, I would love to see her make a comeback in Prime 4. Maybe the teased character Psylux at the end of Metroid Prime 3 will end up playing a role in the return of Metroid Prime. More on that in a bit. Number 3. A finale escape sequence. Escape sequences have always been a major part of Metroid since its beginning in 1986, and in most of its classic side-scrollers, there is a playable escape sequence to finish the game. But to my disappointment, this was never the case for any of the 3 Prime games. There was kind of an escape sequence at the end of Metroid Prime 2, but all it basically was a final boss fight with Dark Samus. I'm talking about a playable escape sequence in the finale where Samus is rushing back to her ship, which involves platforming and fast, suspenseful backtracking. We haven't got that from any of the 3 Prime games yet, and it's an experience I'm hoping to have in Metroid Prime 4. Number 4. A quality balance in the difficulty of boss battles. I like my video games to be difficult. It makes the feeling of finally beating them all the more satisfying. But I also like that difficulty to be in a way that makes sense and is consistent. When it comes to boss battles, the Metroid Prime series has been all over the place, with some being a complete snooze fest, while others have you pulling your hair out. The biggest and most glaring example of this comes from Metroid Prime 2, as some bosses were painfully easy, while others still trigger gamer PTSD to this very day. In several instances, the mini-bosses were much more difficult than the actual bosses, which shouldn't be the case. When I finally fought the foreshadowed Quadraxis, it was initially overwhelming as his epic theme and daunting size makes you feel like you're fighting a god. But then you realize he doesn't hit you all that hard, you have plenty of energy tanks at this point, and he's consistently dropping entire energy tank bits of health. And then you begin to realize that it's all just a front, and he's excruciatingly easy after all. Compare that to the mini-bosses like the Boost Guardian and the Spider Guardian, who repeatedly destroy the hopes and joys of even the most veteran Metroid players, and the contrast becomes just a bit annoying for its inconsistency. Hopefully, this is a balance that Metroid Prime 4 executes well. Number 5. A return of multiplayer. Metroid Prime 2 Echoes was one of the few Metroid games that actually had a multiplayer option, and it was the only game that had it within the Prime trilogy. Prime 2 was released right in the middle of Halo and Xbox Live's multiplayer taking over the video game industry, so it came as no surprise that Metroid would try to emulate some of that multiplayer success, but general audiences didn't think the universe translated as well. To most, the multiplayer was underwhelming, and the Prime series quickly abandoned it as a result. But I'm definitely not ready to completely give up on it just yet, because they barely scratched the surface with all the multiplayer possibilities. Metroid Prime 2 simply used a Metroid version of a Slayer-type format, which doesn't really work as well in a Metroid game since it's basically a bunch of Samuses spamming their arm cannon blasters. What makes Metroid games special isn't simply the combat like many first-person shooters, but it's also the unique array of equipment that Samus utilizes for the sake of exploration and puzzle solving. Metroid Prime's multiplayer should take advantage of these aspects and offer more multiplayer variants like Capture the Flag, Infection, and even some team strategy formats completely unique to the Metroid universe. Stuff like the Morph Ball, the Grapple Beam, the X-Ray Visor, and the Screw Attack should serve more of a purpose than simply trying to kill the opponent. Simply put, multiplayer in a Metroid Prime game could be amazing, but the execution of such is extremely pivotal. Number 6. A major focus on Psylux. As things currently stand, Psylux is a very powerful bounty hunter that we know little about. We know that he hates the Galactic Federation and Samus. He was first introduced on Metroid Prime Hunters on the Nintendo DS, which was released in 2006. He made a couple mysterious and ominous appearances at the end of 2 Metroid games. The first was a special ending of Metroid Prime 3 Corruption, where Samus had just defeated Dark Samus and rid the universe of Phazon. As she speeds off into space, you can see a green ship begin to follow her, and this has since been confirmed by Nintendo to be Psylux. The second ending was on Metroid Prime Federation Force, which was released in 2016. A Metroid egg is being studied by the Galactic Federation when Psylux breaks into the research station. The egg hatches, and the scene ends with Psylux zooming into frame as he's observing the Metroid. What he plans on doing is a mystery, but these appearances are rumored to be a setup for the story of Metroid Prime 4. Psylux could be the main villain of an upcoming title, but he could also be the culprit of something even more menacing and intimidating. With all of this setup that has been developing for a decade and a half, an appropriate payoff is necessary. Psylux's story could go in numerous different directions in Prime 4 that I would be happy with. But regardless of how they play out, he needs to be a driving force in the 4th installment, otherwise much of the anticipation and setup will be lacking a major payoff. So now it's your turn. What are you guys hoping to see in Metroid Prime 4? Let me know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching as always, make sure to like and subscribe for more Nintendo content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.